In the previous episodes, we stripped away the biggest, most attractive delusions sold by the modern self-help industry. First, we dismantled the myth of the creator. We saw through the lenses of the neuroscience, quantum physics, depth psychology, and declassified CIA report that personal ego is not the master architect of reality. It's not the screenwriter, it's merely a localized receiver. The idea that I thought can brute force, manifest, or dictate terms to the universe is just an anxious, ego-driven mind trying to maintain the illusion of control. Then we looked at the paradox of choice. We saw how the ugly duckling ego exhausts itself trying to rewrite its unchangeable design, completely missing its innate power. We established that real creation, that singularity point where breakthroughs happen, only occurs when the default mode network in your brain falls quiet, dropping into alpha and theta waves, allowing pure consciousness to express itself without friction. We looked into the nature of true human choice, how you have zero control over the external wind, but 100% freedom over your internal attitude, the choice between the friction of resistance and the freedom of radical surrender. Which brings us to the ultimate, most haunting threshold. If you are not the creator, if you cannot invent your timeline but only choose whether to fight it or align with it, what is this phenomenon we call fate? Are we just helpless biorobots trapped on a pre-written track? Or is there a profound, hardwired mechanics operating behind your life? Today we are cracking open the cosmic machinery behind our destiny. We're dismantling the grand illusion of fate and law of karma, stripping them down to raw biological and cosmic mechanics. We will decode your factory settings through the lens of Carl Jung and Socionics, reveal why 75% of the world is stuck in survival mode, and explore how this will change within the 2000-year shift we're living through right now. Most importantly, we'll talk why awakening isn't some distant finish line where your life ends, but the exact moment real life on Earth finally begins. Let's dive in. Here is the cosmic joke of life. The reason something happens to you is rarely what it appears to be in the moment, if you can even see it at all. This is precisely where all those clichés about trusting the universe, God's timing, and divine alignment come from. The truth is, our isolated ego mind cannot process the staggering, intricate web of cause and effect shaping our lives at any given second. Not because we're stupid, but because a localized mind simply isn't wired for that level of processing in the material world. The law of cause and effect is actually the foundational law of the physical universe. Ancient traditions captured it best through the concept of karma, but pop spirituality widely overcomplicated it, turning it into some mystical cosmic reward and punishment scoreboard. In reality, the Sanskrit word karma literally just means action. Me raising my hand right now, that is karma. What people usually mean when they throw the word around today is karmic consequences. Every single action carries a consequence. If I raise my hand, blood immediately surges into my muscles to sustain the physical tension of holding it up. That is the direct biological consequence of my action, of my karma. And if you happen to be sitting across from me and I raise that hand as a clenched fist, you might perceive it as a threat. Your amygdala instantly triggers an evolutionary fight or flight response, altering your biochemistry and potentially driving your next move. Your shifted emotional and physical state is, once again, a direct consequence of my initial action, the karmic consequence. That's all ancient traditions meant by law of karma, cause and effect. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Every action carries a consequence, and your localized mind simply lacks the bandwidth to process the infinite chain of causes and effects generated by the thousands of micro-actions you take every single day. This is why when the ego stops playing the tyrant and finally surrenders into becoming a tool for consciousness to express itself, a profound realization dawns. We rarely see the true cause or the ultimate effect of why something happens in our life in real time. Every story, logical explanation, or panic model the mind produces in the moment is almost always an illusion, strictly limited by the narrow scope of the ego-driven mind. At best, we might connect the dots backward later, if our capacity for self-reflection is sharp enough. And that's actually how we change the past. We don't change the facts, we change how we view the events that have taken place. But obsessing over those dots isn't the goal anyway. If something needs to become obvious, it will. Trying to obsessively categorize, decode, and file away every single event is just the ego desperately trying to maintain the illusion of control. Consciousness doesn't need to categorize the chain. It simply experiences the moment as it unfolds. And this brings us to the ultimate question: what fate actually is. Let's dismantle this once and for all, because if you get this wrong, the rest of the puzzle never clicks. Fate is not some Hollywood script written in the stars. It's not a magical decree that you're destined to marry at 25, become a CEO at 30, or buy a house with a white picket fence. That is a naive romantic myth. So what is fate actually? Carl Jung famously said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Think about how profound that is in the context of what we have been unpacking across the series. As we established in our earlier episodes, your brain operates across distinct frequency bands. When the personal ego is locked in high beta survival mode, running on unconscious conditioning, trauma, and reactive programming, you are essentially on autopilot. The default mode network is screaming at maximum volume, and you keep repeating the exact same choices, attracting the exact same conflicts, and hitting the same walls, only to throw your hands up and call it bad luck or fate. But fate isn't a cosmic punishment. Fate is simply the unconscious programs running on your hardware in the background while the ego pretends it's in control. When you don't understand your unique design, you live in constant exhausting friction. And that brings us to the ultimate definition. Fate is simply your architecture operating through the friction of a fighting ego. Previously, we used the term blueprint for this innate architecture. Let's be crystal clear on the distinction here. What is the difference between fate and blueprint? They are actually the exact same hardware viewed through two completely different levels of awareness. Fate is your blueprint operating in the dark. It's your factory architecture run by a reactive wounded ego in high beta survival mode. When you are unconscious of your design, you endlessly fight it. Run through your weakest functions, repeat the same toxic loops, and call the resulting friction fate. The blueprint, on the other hand, is that exact same hardware illuminated by consciousness. The moment you enter the state of radical surrender, slowing down the mental noise and shifting into theta wave presence, you make the unconscious conscious. You don't change your factory settings, you change your relationship to them. Internal resistance drops to zero, and what you used to call fate suddenly becomes pure, unresisted conscious experience. Fate ceases to be a cosmic prison you suffer from and becomes the precise, custom-designed instrument through which you experience reality. In short, fate is the friction of resisting your design. The blueprint is the freedom of embodying it. Ultimately, your job in this life is not to invent yourself, but to decode the exact blueprint hardwired into your body and mind. Because once you accept that personal ego isn't the master creator, that you are here to experience reality rather than manufacture it from scratch, a massive, inevitable question arises. Okay, if I'm not here to brute force a reality, What am I actually supposed to do with this physical form? Why do I have this specific body, this specific mind, and this specific traits? This is where true realization begins, and the answer lies in what Carl Jung called individuation. To navigate this process and honor your unique blueprint, we need a precise mapping system. Over the past century, several analytical frameworks have attempted to build a true decoder for our psychic design, directly on the foundations of Jung work, most notably Myers-Briggs type indicator known as MBTI in the US and Socionics in Europe. In our modern hyper-capitalist culture, the concept of self-actualization has been completely corrupted. It's been twisted into a desperate rat race to quickly package yourself, sell a product, and flex status symbols. But those motivations don't come from pure potential. They come directly from a wounded, insecure ego trying to prove its worth, born out of childhood conditioning, status insecurity, and fear. For Jung, true creative expression was never limited to painting pictures, writing books, or building companies. Creativity, in its purest sense, is the sacred process of individuation itself. Your primary artwork isn't an external product. Your primary artwork is the living expression of consciousness through your human form. As we explored in earlier episodes, when the vessel is properly calibrated, you hit that point of singularity where friction drops to zero. True unadulterated creation is never about guaranteed rewards. It is the physical expression of individuation. Creation isn't something you force. Creation is what naturally occurs when consciousness flows unhindered through an aligned instrument. Living itself becomes the continuous act of creation. When the ego is healed and aware of its proper place, it stops treating reality like a slot machine. It stops asking, what do I get out of this? Will this scale? How will this make me look? Instead, it steps out of the light. It allows consciousness to move, act, communicate, and experience reality through this physical vessel, simply because consciousness wants to experience this unique journey without drama, friction, or frantic control. And this is where typology, and specifically Socionics, the comprehensive analytical framework evolved directly from Jung's psychological types, provides an extraordinarily precise, objective map of our factory hardware. While systems like MBTI popularized Jung's ideas by categorizing personalities into 4-letter codes, Socionics took his work much deeper into structural cognitive mechanics. If MBTI gives you a behavioral snapshot of your personality, Socionics actually opens up the hood to map your precise cognitive architecture, which is why it so flawlessly illustrates the core message of this podcast, revealing exactly where your inner friction comes from, pointing out your vulnerable pain function, and guiding you back to effortless creation through your base function. For those unfamiliar with it, Socionics was developed in the 1970s by Lithuanian researcher Aušra Augustinavičiūtė, who combined Jung's psychological types with Antoni Kempinski's theory of information metabolism. It maps out how the human psyche processes information using 8 fundamental psychological functions, covering intuition, logic, ethics, and sensing. In Socionics, these functions are arranged into a precise structure called Model A. It defines which mental processes operate effortlessly as your innate superpowers and which ones sit in vulnerable weak positions. It is an incredibly detailed, objective map of variants of human default settings. But whether you look at it through MBTI or Socionics, typology is the perfect illustration of the principle we've established. You create nothing, you experience. Your psychological type is not your ultimate spiritual identity. You are not a type. Your type is simply the innate configuration of your perceptual lens. Think of human bodies as cameras. Some cameras are shipped from the factory with macro lenses. engineered specifically for fine details, logistics, structure, and pragmatic execution. Other cameras are equipped with ultra-wide-angle lenses built to capture vast, abstract macro landscapes, long-term trends, and intuitive patterns. The fatal tragedy of modern society happens when social media convinces a person with the hardware of a grounded pragmatic organizer, say an ESTJ in MBTI terms or an LSE in Socionics, that they need to force themselves to act like a daydreaming, ethereal, intuitive poet. This is a catastrophe. That is the acorn desperately trying to sprout maple leaves. That is forcing a macro lens to perform like a deep space telescope, burning out the engine in the process. It's the swan forcing itself to quack like a duck just to fit in the local pond. This dynamic becomes painfully obvious when you look at Model A in Socionics, specifically what is known as the pain function, the vulnerable fourth function. The starving artist who is constantly broke because they refuse to structure their life, the burnout entrepreneur trying to force emotional charisma they don't possess, the spiritually exhausted seeker trying to obsessively calculate every step of their path, they all are suffering from the exact same fundamental mistake. Ego is desperately trying to prove its worth to the world through its weakest, most vulnerable function. When you attempt to run your life through your pain function, every step feels like dragging a massive boulder uphill. It drains 90% of your life force, floods your system with beta wave anxiety, and keeps you trapped in survival mode. True individuation happens when the ego finally gives up the performance. It surrenders the desperate need to prove itself through what it lacks. Instead, it roots itself firmly in its base function, its first function, its innate effortless superpower encoded right into its factory settings. The moment you lean into your natural design, the internal resistance drops to absolute zero. Consciousness can finally flow through your form, creating and experiencing reality with absolute ease, elegance, and joy. And this is where we touch upon something profound that most modern typology completely misses. Frameworks like Socionics or MBTI are not meant to give you a rigid label or a personality box to hide in. Your type is simply the inherent default settings chosen for this body in this lifetime. In their highest sense, they are a map of what ancients called Dharma, your inherent cosmic purpose and divine alignment for this specific physical incarnation. When you are operating on ego autopilot, your type feels like a limitation or a source of constant friction. But the moment you wake up, the moment consciousness becomes self-aware within the form, your perspective completely shifts. You stop fighting your design. You stop trying to force a macro lens to act like a telescope. You accept your innate strength and vulnerabilities not as flaws, but as the exact tailored instrument required for the unique experience consciousness came here to live. Sometimes when a person goes through an awakening process, it might feel like their type is changing. But it isn't. On the surface, it may indeed look as though they have outgrown their psychotype or somehow rewired their core design. But at a foundational level, this isn't a change in the code, it is transcendence. The core architecture of the processor, the order of functions in Model A, remains exactly the same. Your primary filter for perceiving reality never changes. An acorn doesn't magically turn into a maple tree. What actually dissolves is the blind spot and the systemic imbalance. An awakened individual becomes so deeply integrated and whole that from the outside they may seem entirely typeless. They become like water, effortless, flowing, taking the exact shape of whatever vessel the moment requires. Yet beneath the surface, their innate blueprint operates without a single ounce of friction. Awakening fundamentally transforms how your hardware operates. Here is how this shift plays out across 3 stages. Level 1 is ego identification. When your eyes sleep, your type is your prison. You are trapped in blind reactions, desperately trying to prove your worth through your vulnerable pain function and declaring, "This is just who I am." Level 2 is disidentification. As consciousness awakens within the vessel, you realize, "I am not my type. My type is simply the perceptual lens chosen for this incarnation." You stop forcing your weak functions, and your natural base function begins to operate with a single drop of egoic friction. Level 3 is radical integration. Once the ego stops blocking the flow, the entire spectrum of human experience opens up. The rigid boundaries of your default settings dissolve. An intuitive presence effortlessly grounds into the physical present. A hard logician begins to radiate profound, authentic compassion. Awakening doesn't change your factory hardware, it liberates it. The lens remains the same, but instead of being trapped behind it, consciousness now shines freely through it, transforming your type from a limitation into the living expression of your Dharma. And once you understand your individual design, an even bigger pattern starts to emerge. One that connects modern psychological stats directly with ancient cosmic cycles. So let's now zoom out to the cosmic macro level. In Socionics and modern typology, there is a fascinating statistical breakdown. Roughly 75% of the global population consists of sensing types, while only 25 are intuitive types. If you're not familiar with these terms, the distinction is actually very simple. Sensing hardware is fundamentally engineered for the physical, concrete world. It's tuned into details, logistics, practical execution, physical survival, and what's happening right in front of your eyes. Intuitive hardware, on the other hand, especially what typology identifies as the intuitive function, is hardwired to read the hidden frequencies underneath. It's not about magic, it's simply the ability to see non-physical connections, read between the lines, sense psychological motives, and connect dots where the other 75% don't even see the dots to begin with. Now here is where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. If you cross-reference this modern psychological statistic with ancient Vedic cosmology, the overlap is chilling. According to the Vedas, the human history moves in vast cosmic cycles composed of 4 distinct ages, or yugas, each marked by a gradual decline in human consciousness. They use the metaphor of the bull of Dharma, representing truth, virtue, and transcendent vision. With every next yuga, bull of Dharma, the symbol of truth and cosmic order, loses one of its 4 legs. In the first golden age, called Satya Yuga, humanity lives at the highest frequency of baseline consciousness, and the bull stands firmly on all 4 legs. In the second age, Treta Yuga, virtue begins to erode, and the bull stands on 3 legs. In the third age, Dvapara Yuga, truth is halved, leaving the bull balancing on just 2 legs. And the final cycle, Kali Yuga, the age of dense materialism, spiritual blindness, and hyper-egoic control. According to the Vedas, we are currently living in the Kali Yuga. In Kali Yuga, the ancient texts tell us the bull of Dharma is forced to stand on only one single leg, meaning it has lost 75% of its original foundation, holding only to 25, exactly 25%. Whether you look at it through Jungian statistical data or Vedic cosmology, the message is identical. In this specific cosmic era, the capacity to perceive beyond the dense physical surface is by structural design held by a minority. And this brings us back to a concept we explored in a previous episode. What Vedic traditions call the golden inception, also known as the golden pocket. As we discussed back then, ancient texts predict that right in the middle of this dark, heavy iron age of Kali Yuga, a temporary 10,000-year window opens, a mini golden age where global consciousness abruptly shifts direction. The transition to this period will take 2,000 years, then humanity will thrive for about 6,000 years, and then gradually go back to the Dark Ages. Now, you don't need to subscribe to ancient prophecies or imagine this shift as some magical Hollywood event descending from the sky. Think of the golden pocket simply as a cognitive inversion. Essentially, over this evolutionary transition, that 75-55 balance is predicted to gradually flip. Humanity will slowly transition away from 75 egoic sensory-locked survival mode toward 100% intuitive awareness. When you look at reality through this lens, everything changes. If you are operating on that 25 intuitive frequency today, you are not an outcast struggling to fit into the matrix. You are an early hardware release. You are the advanced team testing the exact perceptual lens that humanity is evolving toward for this golden inception. I actually love to joke that some people just walk around with a higher percentage of consciousness downloaded into the body. It sounds like a joke, but this observation actually has a solid neuropsychological and somatic foundation. It seamlessly glues physiology, socionics, and spirituality into one single coherent structure, because these people with quote-unquote a higher percentage of consciousness in the body, they are those exact 25%. Think about it. What is the 75% sensing survival mode? When a person is running on standard survival settings, high beta waves, hyperactive default mode network, that internal I-thought monologue, consciousness is completely trapped in the basement. For them, the body is just a biological vehicle or a functional tool, an instrument to make money, mechanically move through space, or an object to paint and build muscle at the gym. There is very little actual consciousness inside the body. The mind is endlessly chewing on anxious thoughts while the physical body operates on total autopilot. Now, what is the 25% intuitive state, that alpha-theta frequency? Real intuition isn't a delusion or a hallucination in your head. It is a somatic reader. When the DMN, the egoic radio, finally shuts up, consciousness floods the biological vessel. You begin to literally feel truth. You viscerally sense patterns, deception, potential, and non-physical connections through your gut, through your fascia, through your very cells. There is physically more consciousness residing in the form simply because the ego turned off its relentless noise, allowing awareness to flood every single cell of the body. So yeah, you literally walk around with a higher percentage of consciousness inside the hardware. So if your perceptual lens was shipped from the factory hardwired to sense those subtle patterns, you are not weird, you are not broken, overly sensitive, or too ungrounded for the real world. You are simply holding that remaining 25% of intuitive awareness for the entire human ecosystem. You are not fighting reality, you are literally prototyping its future. Because if we circle back to that Vedic transition, this golden pocket, a micro-Satya Yuga that kicked off roughly a century ago, over the next 2 millennia, the bull of Dharma, step by step, will reclaim all 4 of its legs. In a sense, this 25%, those carrying the spark through the darkness of Kali Yuga, were deployed precisely to act as the catalyst for this awakening. And within this 25%, the variety is immense. They carry vastly different types, different levels of awareness, different scopes of influence, and unique combinations of innate tools and system settings. But what unites every single one of them is this exact foundational thread, their intuitive architecture. And let me be crystal clear, this is not about being chosen. The very concept of the chosen ones is a pure byproduct of the ego. To believe in being chosen implies there is an external power selecting a few above the rest. A mindset born directly from institutionalized ego, engineered by church and state to trade on our desperate need for validation, power, and control. There are no elite souls here. The mission of this intuitive advanced team is not to reign, but to serve. It is simply a specialized function within the one body, bridging the gap so that eventually 100% of humanity gets to experience existence through fully awakened, friction-free consciousness. This is the actual process of global awakening, the steady elevation of the planet's baseline consciousness. This brings us to our ultimate synthesis, because once you digest everything we've explored so far, one massive spiritual myth completely dissolves. The idea that awakening is some unreachable distant finish line. I frequently hear people in spiritual circles claim that awakening can never be fully completed, as if it's an infinite loop of perpetual processing. But that's a fundamental misconception. People confuse the endless healing of the psyche with awakening. You don't need to be 100% healed to wake up. Awakening not only can be completed, it must be completed. Because awakening is not the destination. Awakening is merely the starting line of actual life. Life as consciousness intended it for your specific physical body. A life that couldn't unfold as long as a wounded, insecure ego was standing in the way. The tragedy of the human condition is getting stuck in the endless loop of death and rebirth, what ancient traditions called samsara, purely because the ego refuses to hand over the wheel. Awakening is the exact moment you stop trying to manipulate reality, step out of the illusion of being the supreme creator, and simply allow consciousness to live through this physical form. In ancient Vedic philosophy, this state was known as being dvija, or the twice born. The first birth is purely biological. The second birth is spiritual, when consciousness fully awakens within that physical form. Ancient texts described a whole civilization of these twice born individuals as the Ariyas, the noble ones. Human beings whose perception was no longer blinded by the dense survival mode of the ego. This isn't an unreachable utopia. It's simply a description of a society where living fully awakened is the baseline norm. We are at the very beginning of this curve. The numbers of fully awakened people are small right now, but they are steadily growing. These individuals serve as living proof that life doesn't stop after awakening. After awakening, life on Earth finally begins. Humanity isn't facing a Hollywood apocalypse of fire, judgment, or meteors. The word apocalypse literally translates to unveiling. The true apocalypse is simply the light of consciousness dissolving a world constructed entirely by egoic fear. The physical planet isn't floating away into another dimension. Rather, as the baseline level of awareness rises, physical life on Earth finally transitions into that noble awakened frequency. So if you are operating on that 25% intuitive frequency today, remember this core truth. You are not here to force or manufacture reality. You are here to experience it. You are not an outcast struggling in the matrix. You are the advanced team decoding the exact frequency humanity was born to live. This brings us to the close of this fourth season and quite possibly to the final chapter of this entire podcast. I want to speak to you directly with absolute candor. Life is not supposed to be like what we're experiencing on Earth today. It was not designed to be constant suffering. Humanity has become so accustomed to suffering that we've normalized it. Most people don't even realize that what they call enjoyment is just a brief temporary release from ongoing pain. People spend their entire lifetimes chasing money, status, or external comfort just to numb the underlying ache. Material comfort can ease the physical vehicle, yes, but it does not heal the psyche or open the flow of consciousness. You can live an entire lifetime and die without ever truly experiencing a single day of unresisted quiet joy that you're supposed to live with every single day. Why? Because the global wounded ego views life through the lens of scarcity and fear. It invents external gods on clouds or imaginary devils to absolve itself of responsibility, failing to realize that suffering is simply the friction of an uncalibrated vessel. It is the alarm system telling you that you are running on ego autopilot, stepping on the exact same rake over and over again. That's what suffering actually is. It's not a punishment. It is consciousness trying relentlessly to calibrate its vessel. And even when you achieve internal harmony, when you step into full self-awareness and end your own suffering, you still feel the pain of the world around you. Not because of some poetic metaphor, but because reality is a massive IMAX screen onto which all unexamined pain of the global ego is projected. The world we live in today was built from the accumulated trauma of the collective wounded ego over thousands of years. It is a reality continuously fueled by billions of people who daily choose to remain blind to their own conditioning. To create this framework, to write the book, and to record this podcast, especially this 4th season on dismantling modern spiritual myths, I lived through those exact same survival settings for more than 3 decades. I inhabited the exact constraints most people live in, and then passed through the fire of 7 years of awakening to break free from them. And I will be completely honest with you, completing this work felt nearly impossible at times. It required colossal focus under the sheer crushing weight of physical limitations, lack of finances, and the backdrop of an ongoing war. There were nights I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling a quiet panic rising in my chest. I was stripped of almost every earthly comfort, stripped of all titles, connections, routines, forced to survive a wilderness designed to burn away the pride, fear, and self-reliance that had secretly anchored me to the world. So many times I wept in secret places, stumbling when human strength gave out. Nights where I fell asleep in tears, convinced I wouldn't have the strength to rise tomorrow. But morning would come and I would get up and continue anyway. Against all odds, I finished it. The map is complete. The book and the podcast are now documented for those who will walk this path after me. This taught me a profound lesson. Your power comes not from being known, but from not needing to be known. Your strength doesn't come from status. It comes from not needing status. Your peace doesn't come from recognition. It comes from not needing recognition. Being nobody is the ultimate power. When you finally stop needing acknowledgement, you become completely free. 2,000 years from now, the insight I'm sharing with you here won't be some complex metaphysical revelation. It will be absolute common knowledge. If you are listening to this and you feel a quiet recognition deep inside yourselves, you're not here by accident. You are among the advanced team, those who are beginning to anchor the frequency that humanity will take 2,000 years to fully embody. I reference this ancient Vedic prophecy not as a piece of dogma or rigid tradition, but simply because it so impeccably mirrors what I see, sense, and know to be true about this transition. It is the exact timeline of how global consciousness is restoring itself. But right now, in this transition, you are the ones bridging the gap. You don't need to force anything. All you need to do is stop resisting your own blueprint, stop causing your own hell on earth, and allow consciousness to live through you. Bringing this work to completion fills my heart with quiet joy. What has been created here and in the book contains just enough to help anyone it finds to step into radical surrender. Use it. This was done for you. But I must also honor the reality of my physical hardware. The resource of my nervous system is completely exhausted. I have given everything I have for too long with zero external replenishment. But running a physical vessel on sheer enthusiasm is not sustainable. It is a form of torture I can no longer submit my body to. I am drained and I no longer have the human strength to force this machine forward on my own. Once you connect to the source, the knowledge flows endlessly. It is truly limitless, and it feels like I could go on talking about it, recording this podcast and writing books forever, if there is a way to sustain it. But currently, I don't know how to make it sustainable. So if you know how to ensure this work isn't a constant solitary trial, reach out to me. I'll leave my email below. Until then, thank you for listening. Bye.